Good evening, everyone. It is my very, very great honor to introduce Daisy Prince, who will introduce Lord Fellowes to all of you. Yes, let's give an applause for Daisy, right? Most of Daisy's career has been in the field of writing, working for Avenue magazine as its editor-in-chief, Worth magazine as its senior editor, New York Observer as its editor-at-large, and Vanity Fair and Tatler. She is currently the editor-at-large of airmail.com, creating stories for the New York Times, Vogue, The Strategist, Robb Report, and the Daily Telegraph. And to make life even more interesting, she is halfway through getting her Master of Business Administration from NYU's Stern School of Business. Bravo. On a personal level, Daisy and her husband, Hugh Chisholm, have socialized with Lord Fellowes in England, and as many of you know, the Prince family are the proud former owners of Marble House for many years, and it just happens that Marble House is one of Lord Fellowes' favorite houses. So, Daisy, please come forward.
Good evening. Some of this you might have heard before, so forgive me. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Lord Fellowes, writer, director, producer, novelist, and actor. By any measure, Lord Fellowes has had an impressive career in the arts. He received the Academy Award for the Best Original Screenplay in 2002 for Gosford Park. His first produced film, directed by Robert Altman, Gosford Park almost single-handedly catapulted Dame Maggie Smith from national treasure into a global one. He is the sole writer, creator, and executive producer of the 6-season smash series Downton Abbey, has written and performed extensively for both stage and screen. And of course, he is the writer and creator of The Gilded Age, some of which was filmed here at the Breakers, and which we have now learned has happily been renewed for its second season. Lord Fellowes, yes. Lord Fellowes is renowned for his ability to decode the mores and behaviors of the English upper classes, so they can be more deeply understood by a global audience and also perhaps even by themselves. A committed historian, Lord Fellowes is a rare filmmaker who makes a point in his films and TV shows to care about which way a wine glass is held or how soup should be eaten, because he knows that the time, energy, and effort put into caring about that level of historic detail is part of what makes the experience so enjoyable for his viewers. He also understands that the grand houses where his characters live are just as much a part of the story as the drama that exists between their walls. He acknowledges that many of these places are as revered and respected as family members, and whose custodial care and preservation are part of what is required from future generations, occasionally the price. And while he is not the first writer or director to incorporate the lives of people who live downstairs into the story, he is one of the first to invest as much emotional care in their characters as he does to the ones who live above. With his American series, The Gilded Age, he was the first to create an extensive and well-researched narrative around the lives of prosperous, upper-middle-class Black Americans in communities in New York and Brooklyn at the end of the 19th century. But before The Gilded Age, Downton Abbey, and just after Gosford Park was released, Lord Fellowes took a break from the silver screen to write a novel called Snobs, a satire of the English class system. The novel depicts the life of Edith Lavery, an upper-middle-class English girl who marries into the aristocracy and has to learn to navigate their hierarchies and rituals. I first read Snobs when I was working for Tatler magazine, going out with the Englishman I have now been happily married for 15 years to, and trying to figure out my own way in that world. Snobs is about class, but it is really about family relationships and their complexities. It was wildly popular and remains a perennial favorite on bookshelves around the world, I think mainly because it is a therapeutic quality. Part of the reason for the book's success is that it looked at the upper classes through a revelatory and insightful lens that no author has been able to do since Evelyn Waugh or Nancy Mitford. And it's anyone who's lived in the UK for any length of time can tell you, You can read all the books on British history you want, but it will bring you no closer to understanding how to effectively communicate with that group of people. Snobs opened the door into a closed world and became my guide to the people within it. I am not the first American woman to marry an Englishman and to occasionally struggle with the mores of upper-class life. Perhaps if Consuela Vanderbilt had been given snobs when she had married the Duke of Marlborough, her life could have been a little bit smoother. You never know. Fellowes' ability to both analyze and empathize with his tribe and to write about their rights and unspoken rules with wit, clarity, and sensitivity are what makes his work resonate around the world. It certainly resonated with me. Now, before any further ado, let's all raise a glass to Lord Fellowes for all that he has done for Newport, for the Preservation Society, and for keeping us entertained on many a dull pandemic evening.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Good job. Bravo.
Is it now? Oh my God. I probably will. Which chair am I in for? This one? Do you want to go up first?
No, I just need to get myself organized. Are you all set?
I don't know what I'm set for. These terrifying sheafs of papers that she's carrying.
I have 45 questions for you.
I've obviously got a lot to confess.
So you've got to be brief. Let's give an applause for Daisy, who did a great job. Bravo, bravo.
Oh, you are nice. Thank you.
I love hearing her story about reading that book and figuring out how she was going to be married to Hugh. And I do want to acknowledge two other people who are here tonight. Steve Feinberg, if you stand, please, Steve. Steve is the executive director of the Rhode Island Film and TV office, and as Lord Fellowes knows, to get a movie into any locale takes an awful lot of behind-the-scenes work, and Steve is the person who led that effort here in the state of Rhode Island, really helping the economy here, not just in the state, but in Newport as well. And I also want to acknowledge and ask him to stand, the executive director of Lyndhurst, which is the Jay Gould Mansion in Tarrytown, New York, Howard Czar, and some of the filming for The Gilded Age was done at Lyndhurst. Lord Fellowes has been quoted as saying, "The Breakers is the Gilded Age." Here we are. And I'm sure that everybody in this audience joins me in thanking him for his enthusiasm for Gilded Age history, for his love of Newport, and you will hear more from him later, I am sure, and for being a phenomenal storyteller. And as a sideboard, just consider this. Julian Fellowes wrote every single episode, all 52 of them, of Downton Abbey. That's 52 stories and then sub-stories, many, many, many of them. So you have to just wonder what goes on in this incredible mind of his. What an imagination, what creativity. And he really deserves a lot of credit. I read an article that perhaps you have not heard, and it says this: in Hollywood, Fellowes is seen as possibly a madman, an OCD control freak, or simply a glutton for punishment, given that he writes every single episode by himself. So congratulations to you for where it all comes from. I have no idea.
I think that's pretty accurate. I wouldn't argue with it.
I asked the 48,297 members of the Preservation Society, I'm bragging a little bit, to submit questions to me to ask of Lord Fellowes. And as you can imagine, there was a real variety. So, as Mr. Russell would say, let the games begin. And I wanted to ask you first if you would mind telling the story that I know he doesn't like to tell, but I'll ask you to tell it anyway. If you remember in Downton Abbey in the 3rd season, wonderful Matthew, we loved Matthew, handsome Matthew, married to Lady Mary, and they have a baby after all this time, and you killed him off. Now, we don't care about why you killed him, contract. But what was the reaction of the British public to that story?
Well, it was a very difficult moment because in England, you can only get actors for 3 years and then they renegotiate. Here in America, you can get them for 5, but we don't have that. And so at the end of 3 years, you know, it was the actors had to decide whether to stay or to go. You know, when a servant character wants to leave, that's easy. They get another job, off they go. But when a family member wants to leave and is not prepared to come back occasionally, it's the Grim Reaper. And there's no real way round that. And Jessica Brown-Findlay, who played Sybil, right from the beginning said, I'm doing 3 years and that's it. So I knew that. And I did research and I came up with eclampsia, and the Eclampsia Society were thrilled and everyone was thrilled. And I then discovered, I did some research and I discovered that with eclampsia in the 20s, you always died. Once you'd started fitting, you always died. By the middle of the 30s, you could sometimes get through, but that hadn't happened yet. But it was very common that after you'd had the baby, there was a period of an hour or two of peace when everything was normal and you talked, everything was fine. And then the fit started again and you died. And I read this, I thought, this is great. Because we've had the fright, we've had the baby, we've got a happy ending, and then we've got a sad ending. So all of that was absolutely terrific. And it was all planned, and the thing was cast, and the director and everything else. And then we get to the read-through, and I've written by then, I think we had 10 episodes, and I've written about 8. And Dan came up and said, oh, I've decided to leave too. What? And he said, yes, I've got this play on Broadway. He's a charming fellow, actually. I don't want to say anything against him. He couldn't be nicer. And I wish him very well. But, of course, he was our Prince Charming. And anyway, so he said, no, I'm going. And I thought, well, you know, I said, will you come back occasionally? No. And so back comes the Reaper. And I thought, well, I can't do more funerals and memorials and Robert and Cora having a fight and blah, blah, blah. We've done all that for Sybil. So the only way I can get round that is by killing him in the last shot of the show, of the series. And then we start the next series 6 months later. Everyone's had time to think. Mary's beginning to get over it. And that's what we did. And the only problem was that in England, the last show played on Christmas night. So everyone was sitting there, putting in that, you know, that one too many mince pies and all that, and thinking, oh, lovely Downton, this is so cozy and fine. And suddenly, boof, and he's dead. And I got the worst letters any of you ever read. I will never watch anything with your name on it again, ever. And I did have rather difficult time. But in fact, happily with America, because I think you were running a year later. But thanks to the internet, the news had seeped out. So the shock value was not so great over here. But I must say it was rather a difficult time. I was expecting, if not to be shot, at least to be pelted with bread rolls. And I had to live with that for a while. I kept all the letters.
Your stories from the Academy Award-winning Gosford Park to the global phenomenon Downton Abbey to now the beloved Gilded Age have always centered around the theme of class. And class in Newport, as you all know, is our most favorite topic. It goes back for hundreds of years. So I wonder if you could reflect on what it is that has helped zero you in on the topic of class. And maybe, if you would, talk a little bit about your personal background, because I think that one of the assets that you have is that you really do a great job in portraying all sorts of people.
Well, I mean, I do things that aren't about class, you know. I mean, School of Rock wasn't about class. It was about quite a lot of things, but it wasn't about class. But I think I did get interested in class when I was quite young. Of course, I didn't know I was going to be a writer, but my parents were an uneven mix. They're very happily married, and both very rather good looking, which of course mends a lot of fences, but they weren't really the same. My father came from a sort of rather minor so-called gentry family, you know, and his father was a younger son. I mean, it was pas tellement grand chose, but nevertheless, that was what he was. And that wasn't my mother. And my mother had come from the sort of civil service middle class. Her father worked for the something or other, Postmaster General, whatever. And his family, his father had died in the First World War when my father was 3, and they didn't like his mother, who was perfectly respectable on that front, actually, but they saw her as a frivolous sort of flapper person in the 20s. And so they felt very protective of this little boy who their lovely brother had, you know, was dead and so on. And when he came home with this girl, they thought it was terrible. They thought she'd caught him. She'd grabbed him. And the fact that she was very good looking, which I must say she was, and various people wanted to paint her and all that sort of rather traditional nonsense, that didn't influence them because they thought her beauty was her weapon. And all of this, when I was a child, like children do, I started to compute the fact that there was something going on. I didn't really know what it was, but we would be taken to tea with my great aunts. And of course, I had 3 brothers, we were 4 phials of the sacred blood, but she wasn't. And when she brought us, they wouldn't say, "Oh, stay, come, would you like to come for them as 6?" And as I got older, I began to realize what this was. And I saw the pain of it and how this had put a strain on my parents. In fact, as I say, they were very happily married, and so they survived it. But my father was at that time in the Foreign Office, and later he would move over to Shell, and they were often, I was born in Egypt, they were in Kenya, they were in various Sudan, and then eventually my dad was head of Shell in Nigeria, and so quite a lot of my growing up years were spent out of the country in a different system. And my mother was like a liberated woman. When she got to Africa, it was as if they had given her wings, and she was out of the whole thing. And she adored Africa for the whole of her life, actually. And that's what it came from. And the more I thought about it, the more I was sort of interested. And I think, I don't know whether it's accidental or not, because I don't really understand why I made any of the decisions I made since I was about 6, but I did go into a profession, into show business, where the class system didn't have any function. It had its own class system, of course, like practically everything, but that stuff didn't make any difference. And I think that was a sort of escape. And I do think that early interest and exploring of it and that understanding, and also, with my great aunts, they were horrid to my mother, really, but we loved them. We loved them because these things are so complicated. And, they thought they were protecting him. They thought they were looking after him, this awful woman had stolen him. And I think seeing how complicated relationships are. I mean, I always get rather annoyed in a film where the filmmakers tell you whose side you're on from the beginning. And she's the good girl, she's the bad girl, he's the good guy, he's the bad guy, look, he doesn't shave. And all of that. That's not really my way. I think people are complicated. The very few are all bad or all good. And we all let ourselves down in stuff, and we look back on things and think, how did I say that? And, I suppose that's what I like exploring, really.
Great. Wonderful story, isn't it? So the most common question that came to us is, where does your love for Gilded Age history come from? And one of the things we struggle with is this is an era in American history that is misunderstood and underappreciated, even though these houses are beloved. But why the Gilded Age in America?
Well, it started quite a long time ago, actually, because the program had a sort of elephantine pregnancy, as you probably know, because I was doing Downton and they kept announcing it, What happened? It was quite simple, really. Someone gave me a book about Alva, Vanderbilt, and Consuelo. I think it was called Alva and Consuelo, I think. And I read it. And I was rather fascinated by that. These people, Alva Smith, whose family had been ruined in the Civil War, and she'd come and she knew for what she wanted, she needed money. And she found Willie K. Vanderbilt, and she got her money, and she had her children, and then she wanted more. And then you get Consuelo being sort of essentially sold to the Duke of Marlborough. And I started to realize this was actually part of a whole civilization that had come after the Civil War. The war produced great fortunes, as wars do, and suddenly there were all these families rich beyond the dreams of Croesus in shipping, railways, of course, oil, copper, coal, on and on it went. And they descended not only on New York, but on all the big cities, and they wanted to boss everyone around and run it their way. And you have this clash in New York, where the old established aristocracy didn't see why they had to make way for these new people leading their rather quiet lives in Washington Square. But, that wasn't what they wanted. And I suddenly saw this period as America sort of finding itself, discovering what it was to be American, not to imitate Europe, not to be rich in the way the Europeans would have been, but to do it differently, to make their own way. And really, they were, of course, getting ready to become the dominant world power of the coming century. I mean, they were only 20 years away from the 20th century, and by the peace talks at the end of the First World War, the loudest voice was America. And that had already happened. And I saw the period as having a tremendously different energy to the one of Downton. Downton is a rather charming period of genteel decline, of where the upper classes had to accept that it was no longer going to be their way. And they would hold on a bit, and some families would hold on and some would go under, but it was a period of adjustment and getting used to compromise and all the rest of it. That's not what the Gilded Age was about. The Gilded Age was build it here, and that struck me as a rather marvelous thing to explore. And I liked also very much that, like all societies, actually, high societies, it was run by women. But these were a new kind of women. These were tough women. Alva Vanderbilt, Mamie Fish, Tessie Ulrichs, they didn't get pushed around. I mean, now they would be founding industries and they would be the ambassadors to London or whatever, and head of ICI. But that wasn't open to them. But they found a route for their own energy, and that was to create the society of the Gilded Age. I mean, later, actually, with Alva, she did slightly grow out of all that, and she turned to women's rights, women's political rights, and became quite loud on that. And in fact, today we were looking at the tea room she built at Marble House, where she gave a great rally for women suffragists in something like 1915 or something, wasn't it? So she sort of did move on, actually. But there was something about the upward energy of the period. I thought, this isn't Downton at all. These aren't nice, genteel people having people to dinner. That's not it. They're making a life. They're biting it out of the marble. And I loved that, really. And so that's how it began.
So, and we love it. We love this for you're helping communicate.
And there's some of the characters, you know. We were talking earlier, I was talking to Howard about Jay Gould. Jay Gould was a man so ruthless that even the robber barons thought he was ruthless. I mean, he was terrifying in business. And indeed, Mrs. Astor, who was the sort of high priestess of all of this, a self-appointed high priestess, but a convincing one, because she stayed in position for many years. But even she didn't want much to do with Jay Gould. She didn't like him in society, and she wouldn't let his children in until Jay was dead. Only then would she let them in. And he was a very affectionate husband and a very loving father. And he would take his daughter around the garden on her pony, leading her with a rope, in an era when most fathers could hardly recognize their children in a lineup. And I loved that. When I found that, I thought, oh, that's so good, because people aren't simple, they're complicated.
And is Mr. Russell fashioned after Jay Gould?
Well, Mr. Russell is quite near Jay Gould, I think, in that he really is very soft-hearted with his children, particularly his daughter, but is very unsoft-hearted in his business dealings. I don't think George Russell is as bad as Jay Gould, and I think he has a moment. I think he can hit a limit, but I don't think Jay Gould could really. But, you know, he was affectionate, and he looked after, Howard and I were talking about how he looked after his daughter's money, because, of course, these people, Bonnie de Castellane, and then the Duke de Talleyrand-Périgord, you know, all these people emerged from the shadows of the tapestries to claim these women, because they thought, jeepers, I could live like my great-grandparents lived if I could just get her. And that was the competition for these heiresses. You see, the thing in Europe is you don't get an heiress until practically everyone's dead. The elder son gets all of it, and the younger son gets a bit of it, and the daughter gets a settlement. But that's it. That isn't the American tradition. And Consuelo Vanderbilt took $90 million into the Churchill family when she had two perfectly healthy brothers. That would never happen in Europe. And there were far more heiresses suddenly on the market when they started coming over. And it was good for the American mother. Most of them, not all actually, but most of them were women who were married to very slightly disreputable, self-made billionaires who weren't particularly received in Cincinnati, in New Orleans, in wherever it was. They weren't in the front rank. And the answer was to go to Europe, go to London or Paris perhaps, buy a nice duke, and come back with their daughter as the Duchess of whatever it was, and then they'd solved it. So it was a win-win, really. But of course, all they were doing in the case of those families in England, on the whole, was delaying the end. Although the Churchills hung on. I mean, they were laying out great gardens with parterres and fountains and everything else, and everyone else was pulling down the East Wing. You know, they'd hit the buffers. But so they did provide a solution, albeit not a long-term one.
Talking about one of the constituencies that you portray so well is Peggy Scott, and it would be great to hear you talk a little bit about where she came from in your storytelling. And
well, the original idea.
I think one of the things, excuse me, is for me, and maybe for many of you too, I had no idea that there was such an established African-American community in the 1880s in this country. It was just astounding.
Well, that was certainly part of it for me too. I mean, I was very keen that the show, not to be speaking on a particularly high level, I just didn't want it to look like a British period drama. I wanted it to look different so that people got a different flavor from it. And I also felt that in 1882, the end of the Civil War, the end of slavery, it was very recent. I mean, it was, whatever it was, 14 years before or 15, nothing really. And so well within the living memory of every character. And I felt it was important to have characters where we could refer to that, where we could bring it alive. But then I read this book called Black Gotham by Carla Peterson, and in this book, she's really tracing her own ancestors, her own family story. And they were prosperous, middle-class African Americans living in Brooklyn, which was that was the main place in New York at that time. Harlem was really more after the First World War. Brooklyn was the place in the 1880s. And her family had spotted a gap in the market of drugstores, and they had a chain of drugstores. They were, affluent, and they were successful, and so on. And I thought that's how to get them in. These are the people. But I also felt beyond that, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this really, but I felt it was very important to have some really prosperous, positive characters from the African American community who were doing well, who were ambitious, who wanted to get on. And there were, at that time, women writers in that community, published, novelists, and so on. So all of that is perfectly true. But sometimes I feel for the African American youth, it's very important that they see people in fiction leading positive, successful lives. So that was part of it. But, also I hope we've not been sentimental. I mean, the fact is the daily pinpricks of racism were certainly present, were certainly part of it. And we've tried to incorporate that, and so that we understand the way Peggy's family and Peggy herself deals with it, without giving into it, but without allowing it to divert them from their own ambitions. That's what we're hoping to depict. And we've got very good actors, of course, Danae and Audra McDonald and so on. And I'm very pleased with that side of the story. I think it's, I hope it's helpful to be. I hope it's useful to some people.
Yep, great. One of the things that I think people either appreciate or are puzzled by is the fact that you mix fictional characters with real characters. So there are Vanderbilts and Stanford White and Astors in the Gilded Age, but they are real, and then you've got your story. Doesn't that make for awkward storytelling?
Well, what I like to do is to use real people in sort of minor roles. I mean, the biggest role is Mrs. Astor and Ward McAllister, and they are in it quite a lot, but I feel that you need your leading players to be fictional, because then you're not limited. My own belief, this is not a rule, but my own belief is that you shouldn't have real people in it if you're not prepared to let them say and do things they would have said or they would have done. And I don't really feel comfortable getting them to do something they would not have done. And so I tried to stick to that. But, I mean, for instance, if you watch the first series, there's a bit where Bertha Russell sort of tricks Mrs. Astor into coming to her ball by involving Mrs. Astor's daughter in a ceremonial dance to be played out at the ball. And then, discovering Mrs. Astor is not coming, she affects great shock and tells the girl she can't do the dance and she's no longer invited. This, in fact, is exactly what Alva Vanderbilt did to Mrs. Astor. And she involved Carrie Astor in a dance with her own daughter, Consuelo, and then pretended to assume that she believed Mrs. Astor would be attending the ball because of it, which of course is completely untrue. And then she told Carrie she could no longer be part of it. And then Carrie, boo-hoo, oh, Mama, really, can't you come? And finally, Mrs. Astor gave in to the pleadings of her daughter and went to the ball. And so I felt that was all right to give that story to Mrs. Astor, because that's what happened. And all I've changed is the name of the woman who did it. So that seemed fair enough. But, you know, that's my discipline. I think if you have real people, I mean, I did once toy with the idea of doing a drama about the Vanderbilts, but I found that too limiting, because you can't make them do things that they didn't do. And so I retreated into the welcoming arms of fiction. And I just use real people to punctuate it, rather as I use real events. You know, the whole thing of, what's his name, Edison, you know, lighting up Park Row and lighting all the buildings in the square. No, that's all true. That is a true event.
That was a great scene.
And it did attract an extraordinary variety of New Yorkers. And you had people sitting in carriages with postilions and having picnics, and other people walking around buying chestnuts on the street and all the rest of it. And when I was reading about it, I loved the fact that it was something that cut through all that, and the whole of New York was interested in electricity that was coming and that was going to change things, which, of course, it did. And so as I read that, I thought, oh, yes, this is one for us. And so we did it.
You are both an actor and a writer. So I'm curious, which do you like better? And since you're both an actor and writer, why haven't you pulled an Alfred Hitchcock and put yourself into some of the cameo appearances in the Gilded Age, and then you could act and write?
No, I think Hitchcock did that. I don't think it. I once actually, I wrote a series because we'd had commissioned a writer to write this series of a children's show, and a long time ago, and we commissioned a writer to please the company that was hopefully going to make it if they liked it. And then the scripts came in, and I didn't think they were any good, really. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. And the trouble is, we'd spent all the money. So really, to go on with this bid, we needed someone to write it for nothing. And I remember the producer of the TV's channel said, "What fool would do that?" I was that fool. But I couldn't be paid because there was no money. So the only way I could be paid was to write a part for myself and appear in every episode. And I remember the producer saying, I don't understand why this London solicitor keeps turning up in every episode of this show. I said, oh, it's absolutely true, axis on which the plot turns. But in fact, it was just to get some money. And I found when I was doing it, I didn't really enjoy it. I know some people can do it. You know, Clint Eastwood can play a great leading role and direct the picture at the same time. I admire it fantastically. I think it's tremendous, fantastic. But I can't really do that. 1 minute, you're trying to get a sort of broader view of whether the scene is landing and the performance is working and what are the points we're trying to make for the narrative. And the next minute, you'll think, oh, have I got enough mascara? And I just didn't like it. So I didn't really do it again.
So do you like writing or acting better?
Well, acting is very good fun, you know. And it's very jolly, as long as you can remember the lines. And you know, you go all over the world. I mean, if you work, some actors don't work. But if you're one of those actors who works, and I was, and I pushed and pushed too hard, I think, but I pushed and pushed, and I did get work. And I got to the point where I had some running characters in series, and then I was in a series called Monarch of the Glen that went on for about 5 years, and I was in that. And you know, I had taxi drivers shouting at me in the street, when are you going to marry Molly? You know, all of that. But the truth was, finally, when, by accident, I started my writing career, and then I was given this great chance by Robert Altman to write a film set in a country house, you know, and I wrote it, and it did well, and I won the Oscar, and that was all rather incredible, actually, an incredible night, because, well, you are kind, but when I was nominated, I was also up against someone called Christopher Nolan, who'd written a film called Memento. And my agent rang me and said, gee, it's a shame about Memento. I thought, God, if my agent doesn't think I'm going to win this, who does? And wherever I went, everyone said, if only you weren't up against Memento. and finally, I was in Los Angeles, and I thought, well, I'm going to go and see Memento. So I went off, saw Memento. Of course, it's completely brilliant, brilliant film. And as I saw it, I thought, well, if he wins, nothing's wrong. And so I had assumed that Memento had won. And the year before, there had been a moment with, I think it was Michael Caine, when he was the absolute odds-on favorite. Everyone thought he was going to get Best Supporting Actor, I think. And the cameras come running, because they come running up the aisle with these huge cameras, hold them into your face. And the name was announced, and it wasn't him. And you could, I won't say the word here, but these are, and I thought, well, I mustn't do that. So I got my face into a really good sort of, what a good choice expression, so that I was going to do that. And they made the announcement, and I did my, what a good choice. And Emma, who's sitting next to me, said, it's you, it's you. And if you look at the film, you can see me going, oh! And I went up to get the thing. I mean, all of that was very extraordinary, but part of it was that I realized I was being offered a writing career that was of a more interesting level than my acting career.
You have to remember that was the first time you'd ever written anything like that.
Well, it was the first film I'd written that got made. I wouldn't say it was quite the first, but I think I had to accept that, you know, when a door opens, you must go through it. And often I've heard friends of mine, actor, you know, I don't want to do another series. I've played that part often enough. and they throw away their big chance. And I just didn't want to be that person who threw away his big chance. So I opted for writing. I mean, writing's much harder work, really. I mean, I just shouldn't say that in case there's an actor in the room, but you know, acting's very concentrated. And when you have a difficult scene, you have to get into it and change your reality and all of that stuff. But it isn't the same as writing, where you're just sitting alone in a room and people bring you cups of coffee, and eventually you hope there's a script. But nevertheless, I felt that was the journey my life had taken and the corner I'd gone round, and I didn't really fight it.
Do you, when you are writing a TV series, you know, a movie, you have to begin and end it in 2 hours and it's over. At the beginning of a TV series, you don't know if it will be renewed for a second or third or fourth year. In the case of Downton Abbey, it was 6 seasons. Do you know at the beginning what's going to happen 6 seasons later? You have no idea.
No.
So what if you make a
No,
mistake?
you don't have any idea. And
I don't know how
what
you
I
do
think
it.
my rule is to write every series, every season, as you say here, to write every season so that if that's the end, it's okay. So the last episode is a kind of resolution. I mean, in fact, the first season of Gilded Age, Bertha had given her ball, and you know, the romance had come to an end for Marion, and this and this and this and this. And if that was the goodbye, then it was playable. I remember the first season of Downton, we ended with a scene taken actually from my father's life. When he was a little boy, he was about 2.5, and he was staying with his parents and his grandmother at a house in Hampshire, and they took him to a garden party, and with his nurse and everything. And in the middle of it, the man came out of the house and quieted the band and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we are at war with Germany." And I said to him, "Why do you think you remembered that?" He said, "Well, I don't really know, but I think it must have been there was such a kind of emotional electronic shock that went through the company that even as a child, I thought, what's this? What's this? And that was what it was, the beginning of the First World War. And I used that scene. I nearly put a child into it, and then I thought it was a bit camp. So I didn't, but I did use that scene so that if that had been the end and the show had flopped and there were no more series, it would have been an acceptable goodbye to those people. The war had come, that life to some degree was over, and so on. But of course, happily, it wasn't.
Can you give us, I read somewhere that some of us will be disappointed in season 2 of The Gilded Age.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I don't know. You have to understand that yesterday, even important people like Lord Fellowes got a reprimanding note from HBO saying, do not disclose anything. Is this true?
Oh, yes. No, I'm not allowed to say any plot. But I wonder why you're all going to be disappointed. Well, you'll have to tell me when I come back. I'm rather pleased with season 2 so far. I'm rather glad of it. But anyway, what do I know?
You can't. Have you finished writing season 2 yet?
Not quite. I've got one more. I've got a read through of the last episode on Thursday on Zoom for me, and then I've got one last session of notes on the last episode after that, and then I should have finished. But of course, you've never quite finished because right through the shoot, you're getting, why should she say this, and is it okay if this scene's in the bathroom? That goes on till the end of filming. So it's never over till it's over, really. I must just explain why my hands are shaking. This is my wife always insists on this. I'm neither terrified nor drunk. I have a condition called, very annoyingly, called an essential tremor. It's not essential when you've got it, I can tell you. But it's incurable, painless, and it doesn't kill you. So I feel that there are worse things that can happen. But it is rather tiresome to spend a lot of your life throwing cups of coffee in your face. It's something I have to live with.
Just a few more questions. You refer to Newport as a city of palaces. And of course, we're all Newporters, so we love hearing you say that. But what is it about Newport that you like so much? And you really have lauded the beauty of this city and the
Well, I love
history.
Newport because it's so complete. And it's such a statement about a particular period of American history that, I mean, I said this to you earlier, that it's rather like when you go to Versailles, you suddenly have a kind of sense of what it was to be an absolute monarch in 1690, because it's sort of expressed in every building, in every picture, in every floor, in every ceiling. And I feel that if you want to get a view of Gilded Age America, of course you can find these buildings anywhere, all over America. You can find wonderful Gilded Age buildings, and in New York you can go to the Metropolitan Club, or you can go to the University Club, or whatever. Both, I think, Stanford White buildings. And there is a statement of what they thought they were, who they thought they were. But Newport is a kind of place where they lived. It's a sort of way of life. You can still get a sense of the life they were leading as they drove down Bellevue Avenue to each other's houses. These extraordinary houses on their tiny plots of land. So that, I mean, I couldn't get over today when we were at the Marble House and Mrs. Astor's house, Beechwood, it was sort of 5 minutes walk. Nothing. I mean, it's absolutely next door. If they were having a fight, you could hear them. I love that, because that's very not English. You know, in England, if you buy a big house, you assume that you will buy a lot of land around it, and you are essentially the one big house in the village, and that's it. And the next big house is in the next village. But not like this village of palaces. I think it's extraordinary.
So it's one right after another. You think it's a statement about the American culture?
I don't know. I think it's a statement of who they thought they were at that time. And I think it's a sense of growing confidence, because America was about to tell everyone what to do. And these were the people who were going to tell them, or their sons and daughters. And I find that very interesting, that Europe was about to be in recession. Its culture was beginning to be seen as outmoded, its way of life as essentially finished. And, you know, the president of America was laying down the law, and the great imperial houses that had reigned in Vienna or Berlin or whatever, or St. Petersburg for hundreds of years were about to be shown the door by, as the German empress rather memorably called him, the parvenu from across the sea. And that was President Wilson. And he was telling them their way of life was over. And that was just years ahead, not much. And I love, I'm very interested by that.
I have a few personal questions. Your favorite authors?
Well, I always think it's like when people say, what's your favorite film? We all have different films for different moods, and films to cheer us up and films to make us cry. And I think much the same of authors. I do have a soft spot for Anthony Trollope, because I think he has a kind of morality that chimes with my own. His characters are never all bad or all good. They're always somewhere in between. And he's merciful, even, apparently characters very much in the wrong, Lady Mason in Orley Farm or something like that. He has a kind of pity in the way he depicts them. so that you never have no sympathy for them. And I love that. And I hope
How
that
many Anthony Trollope fans are there in this audience? Oh, really? Well, you've got some supporters.
No, I love him. And I like Thackeray, actually. And I like Jane Austen, you know, like everyone does. And I have others. I'm not very good at modern authors. I feel I ought to read far more modern novels than I do.
If you were going to tell anyone to watch a TV series, what would you tell them to watch?
Well, I love television. I'm a television addict. The one I really loved was Mad Men. I thought that was just absolutely fantastic. And I didn't completely like the last episode, because when he became a sort of hippie, I thought, I don't think Don Draper's a hippie. So I rather fought that, but I loved the show. I thought it was fantastic. But then I thought West Wing was absolutely fantastic. I loved, what was that one, Scandal, was it? But then it sort of went a bit bonkers after a bit. And so I came...
What about Homeland?
Yes, no, I didn't do Homeland. I'm not terribly good at either violence or sex. I don't want to ban them, but for me, you know, I don't feel with sex, it's an obvious thing, it's not as if we're bewildered as to what they're getting up to, is it? And for me, it's either just happened or it's about to happen. But for me, it's not really a spectator sport. So I'm not good at those series. But I do love television. I love the I mean, there's lots of them I loved.
What about Billions? That's very hot right now.
Yes, I haven't really done Billions because of the sort of tying up and all that stuff, and stilettos grinding you into the ground. I mean, I'm thrilled it's a success, and both the lead actors are very, very good, and I've worked with them both, and I do nothing but wish them well, but it's just not quite for me.
One final question, and that is, I think, Susan, you asked this one. When and where were you the happiest?
When I was in my 30s, I was doing sort of okay as an actor. And I was living quite comfortably, and it was fine. But then I met my wife when I was 39, and I had my only psychic moment. I met her at a party. I went over to say hello to some guy I knew, and he said, "Oh, do you know Emma Kitchen? Have you met Emma Kitchen?" And I said, "How do you do?" And I looked at her, and I knew I was going to marry her. And I thought, she's here at last. I've waited for 40 years, and she's turned up. And of course, I did actually propose to her 20 minutes later. But she thought I was mad, and so she wouldn't give me her number or anything else. And I had to track her down. But I did track her down. And I took her to a restaurant with pictures of Venice on the walls. I said, "When we marry, should we go to Venice for our honeymoon?" She said, "If you keep this up, I'm leaving." And 15 months later, I married her, and we went to Venice for our honeymoon. And very soon after that, I mean, literally a sort of 9 months and a minute, we had our son. And those years, my 40s, I changed. Something changed in me. I think I started to smell differently in some way that I can't put my finger on. And I got back from our honeymoon, and I was immediately cast in a leading role in a series by Danny Boyle, you know, the director. And my whole career went into a different gear as an actor. And that 10 years, I mean, it sounds a bit ungrateful to say that you know, when Gosford came and everything else, I was less happy, but it was more complicated. And my life became more complicated. But the 10 years of my 40s, when I was successful enough to feel successful, and very happy in my marriage, and I had a son, and of course at that age they think you're marvelous. It doesn't last, but anyway. And all of that was my happiest time. I loved it.
Well, we are so very happy that you have centered on the Gilded Age and that you have brought Newport to life. And we absolutely adore Lord Fellowes. And we wish you the best of luck. 6, 7, 8 seasons, please, to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was jolly nice.
Thank you all very much for being here tonight.